And hi, Michelle Gibson. Thank you so much for coming back for the second part of your story and all of the evidence that you have found thus far for our particular state of Georgia. Thank you again and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me back. And after the presentation last month, I realized this would be a whole lot more impactful if I brought it closer to home for all of you. And so I went back through some research that I've already done. So nothing that I'm going to be presenting today is new to me. I've already got the information compiled, and there's way more than what I'm going to be sharing. We would be here, we would be here for days if I pulled it all out. But I did some in-depth study around the Atlanta area, and then I've got some examples from a few examples from South Carolina and around Charlotte to show you that I put in towards the end, and some other places as well to give you an idea of what Ellen was talking about in my bio in terms of this evidence just being everywhere, the same architectural style, everything. And it gets really confusing because this major civilization is being kept from us, and it's been called different civilizations, but it really isn't. Even though the architectural styles we have associated with ancient Greece and ancient Rome and so forth, they did it too. And I'll give you the examples of that in the presentation today to show you how that could be possible. So I can go ahead and get started if you'd like.
Yes, please. Just go ahead and
questions.
Jump right in. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to just ask your questions as we go along in case we get too far ahead. You might forget your question, but please, by all means, Michelle, take it away.
Okay. And just a few more things. My background is in social work and psychology. I graduated with my degree in 1989. So I'm not a trained historian, but I always had an interest in history, and I loved it in high school. And so I had a pretty good grounding in the history that we've been taught. And I consider it a blessing that I didn't go for an advanced degree in this subject, because I don't think I would have been open to receive the information as it is, just as a, somebody that has a passion and an interest in it. I'm just guided by what I'm shown.
Exactly.
You follow my nose, and this is where my nose has taken me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I have a PowerPoint presented for today. But there is one thing that I want to show you again. I think I might have mentioned this in the last one, but I want to talk about where my own research started, which was the star tetrahedron that was mentioned in the bio. So let me just pull that up real quick, just to put that as a starting point, because that was my own starting point on how I got here today. And I just have to find it here.
No
so
problem.
my original research started here.
Oh.
And basically I had the map sitting on my dining room table. A friend gave me when I was living in Oklahoma City between 2012 and 2016. And I was traveling with her and several other people, and she got it. She said, I think you need this. And I would never have gotten myself a map. So it was a really good thing that she got that urging, because this is beginning of my story, well, part of my story, the big part of my story. So I was sitting there, and the first thing I noticed was all of these places lighting up. And so you see New Orleans and Mobile and Montgomery and Atlanta and, Charlotte's around here. On this one, I found that. I found this one. I found these down here. And then I found this major one up here in Edmonton and brought it down to Ottawa. And then took it down here. And because I was already familiar with sacred geometry and, the basic idea of the star tetrahedron and so forth, I was able to find this shape in the North American continent. And then I took the research further by extending the lines out, writing down the cities that lined up, and then going back and looking at all those places. And that was the beginning of my research. And for those who are on Connecting Consciousness, I would imagine a fair number of you know about the Merkaba and the human light body.
Yes.
And so this is the same shape.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it lends itself to a whole different vision of the original humanity than what we've been told. You know, who were the children of Israel? And I think we're talking about the same. It's all mixed in together. And the controllers just separated all of that out. But we were all, at one point in time, I think for, you know, millennia, humanity was all connected, and we all knew this about our light bodies and our connection with the Creator and how to reach higher consciousness. You know, we're with the world we've been living in, we're stuck in our lower chakras for the most part. And it's hard to get out. You know,
Yeah.
they're masters of addictions, you know, the psychology of addiction and, you know, psychoses, mass psychoses, and all the stuff we're dealing with right now. But we weren't always like that. We were functioning at a much higher level. And I'm going to be going over examples today. And I think more than anything, I just really, I've got my own conclusions about what we're seeing, and I'll share them as appropriate. But more than anything, I want to get you thinking about your own surroundings and just looking at it differently. Because the buildings that are there, what we're told about the buildings in our historical narrative, and there's a story for all of these buildings and places. Do they make sense? And so I pulled most of my information from research that I did around Atlanta when I was following a circular alignment that started in Washington, D.C. and ended in Washington, D.C. And it took me up the eastern seaboard. It took me across Nova Scotia and the Atlantic to Spain, and down through Spain and into Africa, and back up through South America, into the Pacific Ocean, through the Galapagos Islands, and back up through Mexico. And that took me back to DC. So that was one of the alignments that I was following. And that's where pretty much all of the information in this presentation is coming from. But I've got more, but that's another show. So I don't know how many of you are currently living in Atlanta or have lived in Atlanta, but most of this will be in the Atlanta area. And this is starting with Druid Hills. And some of my tags here are going to be a little low for the screen, it looks like, but this is Druid Hills Baptist Church. And it was said to have been built sometime between 1918 and 1928, if you look it up in the historical record. And the building was inaugurated in 1928. And it's also known as the Church at Ponce and Highland. And it was said to have been designed by an architect by the name of Edward Emmett Dougherty. So that if you look it up, that's what you're going to find out. I'm going to go into that here in just a moment. And so first of all, they're telling us that this beautiful Greco-looking building, Greco-Roman looking building, was built in between 1918 and 1928. So if you put that into perspective, that would have been right at the end of World War I and right before the beginning of the Great Depression. Those are the dates that were given for the building of that beautiful building. And if you look where the arrows are pointing, you can see where it's going down. They're built right at ground level, big windows. And you can see where it's uneven here, going down the walkway here. And then if you look at the other side of the building, you see the windows below ground level. And then if you look at the front of the building, first of all, those columns are massive. Why would you build a building that big for normal sized people? And you know, again, look at the size of that middle door there. I haven't been there. I'm just going from the perspective in this photograph, but that door looks pretty big to me.
Yeah.
And
you see that on a lot of churches. Yeah, what they consider churches. It's not a church, really. Some of that stuff.
You know, so originally, and this is, other people are doing research on this as well. I've done some research on it. These buildings had, it seems like a purpose of healing and harmonization and balance. It was a place for people to gather, but it was not exactly what we've been taught. It's more like it's more like they were masters of frequency and sound resonance and healing, and organs were part of that. Cathedral rose windows, different cathedral windows were part of that. Cathedral rose windows are solfeggio frequency shapes. So I didn't really go into a lot in this presentation, but I do go into it in some things on my website and my YouTube channel, you know, to show that. But I wanted to bring this up as an example because, you know, the elaborate nature of it, and then this evidence here where it's underground. And a lot of people have been researching what's called the mud flood. And it really appears that there was some kind of cataclysm, and I personally think it was deliberately caused. There was a cataclysm which caused the earth to liquefy, which in turn created a flood of mud, and the civilization was wiped out. And, you know, I think a lot of our history is just, you know, instead of these things being built, things were being dug out and made useful again. So it's something that they could start over with. So it's like we live and work on top of this older civilization. And again, I'll be giving more examples of that. So if you're looking for mud flood evidence, this is the kind of thing that you're looking for if you start looking around where you live in your own communities. This is not just here.
Yes.
This is really everywhere.
Yes. I've seen some of the other evidence from some of the other researchers on YouTube, and it is absolutely everywhere. And I just wanted to interject about those huge doors. There's a reason why they're covering up the giants. I believe that was part of our civilization as well. These other more intelligent beings, whether they're more intelligent, I don't know. I don't think all of the giants were evil. I believe that they're part of Atlantis. And that center door is an access for them to get through, while the other doors are at the man size.
Yeah, they were there. We were much bigger on the average than we are now, and not evil, not evil. But it's the evil ones that people know about. So, so let's call these. I think the majority of the human population were these very tall, good beings. Or we would not see the level of integration everywhere. And again, I'm going to be showing you examples of that. So if you look up Edward Emmett Dougherty, the architect that's credited with the Druid Hills Baptist Church, you find out that, you know, there's not really much distinguishing him here in Wikipedia. He's best known for the War Memorial Auditorium in Nashville in 1922. And again, you're looking at this one down here where the arrow is. I'm going to move you guys across the screen here for just a sec. That he's credited with designing that building in Nashville. Again, that's an incredible building for the 1920s. You know, you see that in the old country, as we've been told. You know, definitely looks Greek or Roman according to what we've been taught. You see it all over Europe primarily. But again, it doesn't match because there wasn't supposed to be anything here. This was supposed to be an empty land filled with hunter-gatherers. And so therefore, everything must have been built in the timeline that we've been given for the age of this country. So, so that's one of what he's best known for is this War Memorial Auditorium in Nashville. But, you know, other than that, he was born in Atlanta. He graduated from the University of Georgia in 1895. He studied architecture at Cornell University, and he went to Paris, studied École des Beaux-Arts, which is one of the architectural styles that you get for this. You get, you know, Greek Revival, Roman Revival, Richardsonian Romanesque, Victorian Gothic. You get Moorish Revival every once in a while, but those are the names that tend to be attached to it. He had a partner in his practice, several partners. Part of his career, he worked in Nashville and then did this memorial auditorium, got married, died. There's really nothing remarkable in this man's history in Wikipedia that was said to have designed this building. That is just amazing building. Class.
Yeah. That's cool though. They love putting a figurehead to something else. That's what they seem to be very capable of.
Yeah, I mean, they had to have an explanation for it, so they've got that. And I think in this case we're talking about Freemasons. There's other secret society groups that were involved in this, but I think when it comes to this kind of thing, we're talking Masonic influences, and they're not the original Masons. They just kind of opportunistically took credit for everything. Much better known is Frederick Law Olmsted. And I have done some interesting research on him, or when I did research on him, some interesting things came up. And I think there's some famous people that are part of this. How are we going to cover, how are we going to explain all of this? And I think Frederick Law Olmsted was one of them. I think Frank Lloyd Wright was one of them. And I have done some in-depth research on that. So, I'm saying that really believing that they were part of this as well. And so Olmsted was said to have designed both Druid Hills and the linear park there. So this was his plan for Druid Hills, and you've got the linear park kind of snaking its way here, and it looks like that. And he was said to have designed Druid Hills in the early 1890s. And this style with the snaky looking shape here was said to have been his own curvilinear style of these different parks. So you've got parks on either side of the linear park in Druid Hills. So that's supposed to be signature Frederick Law Olmsted. And he was also the landscape architect, along with Calvert Vall, that was credited with Central Park. But he also got credit for a lot of other landscapes. And this is including, but not limited to, the examples that I'm going to share here. So you have him getting credited with the Emerald Necklace in Boston, in Massachusetts. The big one down here in the left-hand corner is Franklin Park. And then if you look at this bridge in Olmsted Linear Park in Atlanta, in Druid Hills, and then you've got both of these very, very old stone structures in Franklin Park in Boston. So, kind of similar in the archways. You've got, same shape going here. And then this, the steps, and this is like an overlook, like a picnic overlook is what it's called. An old stone overlook shelter there. So, again, these were supposed to have been constructed in the late 1800s, that time frame, late 1800s, early 1900s. And so there's an excuse for them being there. Well, Olmsted designed the parks, therefore these structures came with when the parks were developed. But, again, I'll let you decide if you think it's logical that these structures are a little over 100 years old.
Yeah, what gets me about all of this, not just this architecture that we're viewing now, but absolutely everything else that has an excuse timeline behind it is in the 1800s, when they've done all of this major construction all over the world. It's just weird.
Yeah. I think the reset, the historical reset, was taking place primarily in the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s. And there's a lot going on in the 1800s. But starting from the early 1800s to the late 1800s, early 1900s, but a lot going on in there. And things really ramped up about mid-century in the 1800s. This is an example of Olmsted's Grand Necklace of Parks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it's also known as the Emerald Necklace, like the one in Boston. And I'm saying this guy got around in our historical narrative. He's got parks everywhere. These are just a few.
He's amazing, you know, it's just like Michelangelo. He did everything.
Just everywhere. And there's a number of architects and famous people credited with things like that, bridges also, that were amazing. You know, we're not supposed to have transportation much beyond horse and buggy, and yet they're getting everywhere. And, you know, the whole railroad story is a whole different issue. And I'll talk about that in a kind of a small part of that today. But again, it doesn't match. They want us to believe that they were building railroads, for example, in the, you know, starting in the early 1800s, and they were just laying track, you know. And by 1850, there was quite a bit laid already. Again, this is what they're telling us, that, you know, they've got all these trains up and running, and you know, they must have, for these guys to have gotten around so much. So anyway, I've done some in-depth work, and I've got that on my website, piercingtheveilofillusion.com. And Olmsted's name is also associated with Atlanta's Piedmont Park. And we're told that was the location of the Piedmont exhibition in 1887. And it was his sons that were supposed to have designed Piedmont Park. And I'm going to be talking about that here in just a moment. The Piedmont exposition of 1887 was said to have only taken 104 days to plan it from the time the Piedmont Company was formed in June of 1887, which this Wikipedia article is about, and its opening day was on October 10th. So I've underlined it here. It says planning of the exposition took 104 days from the time the company was formed. The main plan called for the clearing out of a 189-acre forest, which is now Piedmont Park, they're telling us. And they constructed several expensive buildings and a horse racetrack. So they're telling us that it was built from scratch. It was built completely from scratch in what's Piedmont Park now. And then it was torn down. And this is the Cotton States and International Exposition in 1895 that was said to have been designed to promote the American South and the world and promote new technologies. And there were other architects, like landscape architect Joseph Forsyth Johnson was credited with the design of the park. Bradford Gilbert was the supervising architect of the fair. So they're telling us that, you know, this went up quickly also. And, you know, so you've got these tall colonnades with these statues on top. You've got these beautiful buildings. And apparently they worked really fast. And again, all that's left of that construction are stone balustrades that are scattered around the park that were the only remaining part of the enormous main building. So what they want us to believe is that they were built within a relatively quick period of time, and then they weren't meant to be permanent, they were meant to be temporary, and then they were taken down afterwards. And the World's Fairs and Exhibitions and Expositions is a gateway topic for this subject because a lot of people are looking into it. If you see pictures of these World Fairs, starting around 1851 with the Crystal Palace exhibition in London, on up for the next 100 years, at least 1950, especially those, you see this incredible architecture. Chicago, Omaha, London, Hanoi, Hobart, which is the capital of Tasmania. Venezuela had one. You know, basically the same story. They had these major international expositions, and then they took everything down. There's a few places that have buildings that are still standing. The Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco was said to have been built for the Pan American exhibition in 1915. Chicago has like 2 or 3 buildings that are said to have been left standing, but they're gone for the most part. So that's something that has brought a lot of people into this topic, because the story doesn't match the narrative. And I'm going to be going into more examples of that. I mean, that's how my own research has developed along those lines. So when you really start looking at what they have to say about all of this, it just crumbles what they say. And this is a view of Piedmont Park in Atlanta from Google Earth. And for those that have been there, this is the Lake Claramere Bridge, the Greystone. You know, a lot of people have their wedding parties there or whatnot. It's a big place for the cultural life of Atlanta. And so you've got these, you know, again, these beautiful old stones and stone buildings. Do I need this? Here, there we go. Okay. And let me see what I have written down here. Okay, so Olmsted's sons, John and Frederick Jr., were credited with the completion of the Piedmont Park today in Midtown Atlanta, and it was called the Central Park of the South. Okay, so the next slide I'm going to show you is, here we go. Okay. I'm going to point out some things later on, but in this particular view, you see Midtown Atlanta from the Lake Claramere Bridge, so the one on the left. And then you have a view on the right of the Manhattan skyline from the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Reservoir. Gotta see if I can move you guys up here. Because it really looks very similar. 2 completely different places. If you want to believe our historical narrative, or what our historical narrative has to say, is, you know, everything was just kind of built in its own way, its own time, different people. But with the older buildings and the skyline, it really does look very similar. You know, you've got the 2 towers here in this building, and you can kind of see something very similar with this building here, with the points. You know, you got some more points back here, points here. You've got that point there, which looks like that might be a state capitol building or something. I'm not sure. But the other thing I want to point out about these 2 pictures is that they seem to be facing in the same direction. And I'm going to give more examples of that.
Interesting.
It's like they're oriented in the same direction. Now, that may not be true with the newer architecture, but it seems to be the case with the older architecture.
And honestly, those look like acupuncture needles, you know, for the earth. If you had to get into it, I guess. Because isn't that what the Osiris statues are like acupuncture needles?
Well, I think there was a knowledge of where everything was in the earth, and everything was precisely placed. And there was a free energy generating system that everything was a part of. And I've come to believe that, and other people are talking about that as well. And so I think everything served a purpose. So some of them may have been doing something like that, and it was connecting heaven and earth. So, you know, the older archaeoastronomy where megaliths line up with, you know, solstices and equinoxes and
Yes.
The Pleiades and the Rand's Belt and all of that. You've got that situation existed up well into modern times. And again, that's well hidden. But with the internet, you can look up pictures and you can see solar and lunar alignments with state capitol buildings, with the Statue of Liberty, with other famous landmarks. I've seen it with the Taj Mahal, with lighthouses. There are pictures showing the sun or the moon perfectly lined up with them. So it's like there's something going on there. It wasn't random. And I think it was based on sacred geometry. I think it was based on, I think Earth was a very special place. You can call it the Garden of Eden, or however you want to look at it. There was something very special about Earth that there was a symbiotic relationship with the universe. And that's my jump from the information that I'm getting, but I'm seeing a very beautiful civilization.
Yes. Yes.
That they don't want us to know about.
And have you heard, not to change the subject slightly, but have you heard about the energy points that these movie theaters have? Like they're supposedly on some sort of ley line or something that harnesses the energy, and the people go in there that elicit emotions from watching these films. Somehow they're using that as a resource as well. I've heard just a blurb. I haven't looked further into it, but.
And that's a good lead into my next slide.
Okay.
I seem to be having issues with my, let's see, here we go. Fox Theater.
Okay.
In Midtown Atlanta, was said to have been originally built to become a large shrine temple, but the $2.75 million project exceeded their budget. This is what you find when you look it up. So the project was said to have been leased to movie mogul William Fox, and it opened in 1929, 2 months after the stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. The theater closed only 125 weeks after it opened, and new owners acquired it, which is Paramount Pictures and Georgia-based Lucas and Jenkins, after the mortgage was foreclosed in 1932. So they want us to believe this $2.75 million project had to be taken over by a movie mogul, and then it closed only 125 weeks after it opened.
Yeah.
Again, does that ring true?
No.
Doesn't to me. And it's clear, this is clearly Moorish architecture.
Yes.
And so, and there are many theaters, older theaters across the country that are like this, very similar to this. There's other Fox theaters, there's Paramount theaters. Richmond has I want to say it's called the Altea Theater or Altria, something like that. It's a Moorish, supposed to be like a Moorish shrine or a shrine temple kind of thing. But it's, it just doesn't make sense what they tell us, and the fact that it exists at all. So, I showed you the Druid Hills Baptist Church that looks Greek or Roman, existing at the same time with a Moorish temple or Moorish shrine temple or mosque or whatever you would want to call it. So, again, I'm pulling out what we're told about how this came into existence. That it was shrine temple, hugely expensive, taken over by Fox, 125 weeks open, and it foreclosed. So doesn't make sense.
No, well, all these banksters have been going around bankrupting everybody, lending money and then bankrupting nations globally. So, global domination.
Move that over a little bit. Okay. So this is the Ponce City Market in the old 4th Ward. And I have arrows pointing to uneven and slanted places around the building here. Mm-hmm. So you've got, this corner of the building is much shorter than down here. Why would you build a building like that? But, so again, because we don't know that anything's being hidden, well, they must have had to build it that way. But what if the building goes down underneath, much further down, and they just kind of paved everything over it to make it to where they could turn it into a building based on whatever it was before. And so again, these are the kinds of things you look for when you look around your communities. What's going on with these buildings, with the slants. You've got the street level down here and you've got the street level up here. And then around the city market itself, you can see again where it's just really uneven here, this side of the building. Okay. So you've got the Ponce City Market, a view of that here, same building. And you see it kind of low down here. And then the Fulton Cotton Mill lofts in Cabbagetown. So a lot of these older buildings are being turned into lofts. It's quite the thing. Really nice on the inside. But I really want to point out this tower and how similar they look. Again, you have it, they appear to be kind of facing in the same direction, slant-wise. And again, they look very similar. And I'll have another example of this kind of thing coming up. If you're familiar with the Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta.
Yes.
And there's tons of pictures of it online. So basically you see more of the same thing. The beautiful, beautiful old stone buildings. Different examples. And you find that same type of cemetery architecture all over the world. This is an example in Paris, in France. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Père Lachaise, I guess. Maybe I will try. You see the same thing in Italy. New Orleans has beautiful old cemeteries. And I do think there's something more about the story with cemeteries. I don't know what it is, but I think there's a lot more to that. I just want to point that out, that Oakland Cemetery is quite sophisticated in terms of its architecture.
Yeah, I wonder if there was some sort of garden before, and then they just started burying bodies there to kind of cover it up, make it seem like it was something else. Because I mean, why would you make something like that for dead people? Seriously.
Well, I mean, they could have, that's what they could have been turned into, repurposed in some way. Or the whole idea, like with the catacombs in Paris and Rome. I mean, I don't know if you've seen pictures of the catacombs in Paris, but it's pretty creepy.
Yes, with all the skulls, walls, and stuff.
Yes, bones and skulls on the walls. That could be part of an energy source, in some way.
Yeah, so Marcel Vogel said that the skeletal structure is crystal. It's crystalline. Our whole body is made of crystal. So, I mean, that probably compresses all those bones and then emits frequencies out.
So I'm sure there's more to the cemetery story. I just don't know what it is. But, again, you see this very old architecture all over the world. And some of it's even more sophisticated than this.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. It really is. But then what was its original purpose? Maybe that was water that was running around there.
So this is Castleberry Hill, which is southwest of downtown Atlanta. And Castleberry was said to have become established by Daniel Castleberry, who apparently won the land in a Georgia land lottery in 1921. So that's how Castleberry Hill came into being, we are told. And so this it's a booming urban renaissance area since the early 1980s. A lot of loft conversions of what are called former industrial area buildings that started around that time at the beginning of its existence. And then they were turned into residences like this building here. And again, I have the arrows pointing to the slanted road. Kind of hard to tell, but that's the point I want to make with this. You've got, you know, a lot more buildings showing down here. And then as you go up the street, the building slants. In a lot of cases, the windows become ground level windows. And again, this is stuff that you can look around your own communities. So many more examples of this than I have time to share here. It's everywhere. And this is the inside of one of the lofts in Castleberry Hill. So they clean up nice.
Yeah, so we've done some filming down in Castleberry Hill a few times. And from some of the other videos that I've seen where people are researching the free energy, the bricks actually have some sort of electrical conductivity to them.
Correct. And you can see pictures of the fronts of these buildings where they have magnetic patterns that show up in the photograph. So you're not necessarily going to see them with the naked eye, but you do see them whether picked up in photographs or video. You know, there's something going on there. And, you know, now Castleberry Hill is nice for art walks and things like that. And that's why I showed this picture. Okay, so, oh, and here's another one, another building in Castleberry Hill. It's an old brick wall.
Yeah, very old.
Okay, so this is the part of the rail system that I'm going to get into today. And I really just want to point out that there were trolley cars in what are called inner urbans all over everywhere. And for the most part, they're all gone. And Atlanta was no different from other places. And I'm going to show you examples of that here. So Inman Park in Atlanta has been around since the 1880s and was called Atlanta's first planned suburb, complete with its own electric streetcar shuttling commuters to downtown Atlanta, just a few miles to the west. And this is a map of Atlanta's original streetcar system. And I really like Zoom, but sometimes it's
No, it's kind of quirky, honestly.
I'm gonna move this up here. So this is an old map of the streetcars in Atlanta. And I'm pretty much going all over the area. And then this is what you've got running today. So with the original streetcar system, this was 1924, and the last streetcar from the original system went out of service in 1949. Okay, this is all stuff you can look up. The reason given for the decline of streetcars is the popularity of the automobile. But why? Why scuttle an efficient and affordable mass transportation system and replace it with a polluting and expensive one? Not only that, you know, there's so many issues with replacing, you know, an efficient public transportation system with cars that, you know, people get into wrecks with. So you've got the insurance industry, you know, you've got the manufacturing sector, you've got the gasoline and oil sector, you've got, you know, the medical sector, you know, with people that are harmed in accidents, injured in accidents, killed in accidents. You know, they replaced it with something that they could monetize on a lot of different industries. And when you look at one of the streetcar lines that returned to Atlanta. It's a 2.7-mile streetcar line that opened in December of 2014 between Centennial Park, and it goes along Edgewood Avenue to the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site. And so, I mean, you've got it hitting a lot of major places downtown. So you've got the Centennial Park, which is right next to CNN Center and Phillips Arena and Coca-Cola, the aquarium. Park Place, Underground Atlanta, Georgia State, Grady Memorial, King Historic Area, Peachtree Center. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on down there. I don't know if there are any other streetcars that are set up. Some of you might know that. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there was an extensive streetcar system in Atlanta at one time. And this next picture is Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I wanted to show you the contrast between these massive masonry buildings here. You know, clearly an old picture. You know, you've got your horse and buggies here, and you've got an electric streetcar. So, you know, where the technologies just don't match. You've got the ability to run electric streetcars, but your primary transportation is still horse and buggy. The other thing that you have are these towers here. And these show up in a lot of old pictures that aren't there anymore. So, you know, maybe some kind of early wireless technology or something like that.
Yeah, you know, not to interrupt you, but they just recently found one of those things in the ocean over in Antarctica. Something looks just like that in the water all the way down on the bottom of the seafloor. So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it is. And that's interesting information. I didn't know that, but I mean, they've been dismantling this system for quite some time. They had to bring it up to a certain extent to get the civilization, the New World Order started, if you will, because I think that's what it was. I think this is a New World Order timeline, and they constructed it from the old world. And the old world had technologies and things that we can't even begin to imagine. So we already had all the stuff that we were hoping on getting in our future. Okay, so so again, you've got the streetcar there in Charlotte, and sorry, everybody again. Here's a closer picture of the streetcar. You know, again, you have these beautiful buildings with their spires and their, you know, towers. And this is a residential street in Charlotte. So they even had streetcars in residential neighborhoods. You know, we're familiar with the ones that do exist today that in the bigger cities, you know, you'd expect it in the bigger cities, but apparently they had streetcars running around all over the place. And I've seen old pictures of streetcars at places like Miami Beach and, you know, beach areas up and down the coast, New York. This service was all over. I've seen pictures of one in Manaus, Brazil, which is in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. And there's not one anymore there today. And again, the story they tell us about how it got there doesn't make any sense. It was built in the 1850s or something like that. And you can't even get in there hardly by car today. You've got the river, the Amazon River, and the worst road in Brazil, it's called, because most of the time it's impassable. And again, they want us to believe they were building streetcars in the middle of the Amazon rainforest in the 19th century.
Yeah, that one is bizarre. I haven't thought about that, but that's like, well, you think about the Amazon, you don't think about streetcars.
You don't think about streetcars. Again, that's something you can look up in images for Manaus, M-A-N-A-U-S, Brazil.
Okay.
And historic streetcars. And as a matter of fact, wherever you live, I would recommend that you look up historic streetcars in blank and see if your community has archival records of them, because I would think that they do. getting close to the end of this particular part, then I'll take questions. Okay, so down here a little bit. Okay, so this used to be the Union Depot in Durham, North Carolina, circa 1910. This is the bell tower at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, here in the middle. And this is the Parliament building in Hamilton, Bermuda on the right. And this is what it looks like in Tenerife, in the Canary Islands. I want to say it's called Santa Marta de Tenerife or something like that. And this is an old city in Morocco called Ait Ben Haddou. And you have the same thing going on in all of these pictures. The towers with 2 or 3 or 4 windows. So I don't know what the age of this one in Morocco is, but it looks, you know, pretty darn close to what you see in Tenerife today. And, you know, this building is still standing. This one's still standing. I don't think the Union Depot in Durham is still standing. And then just to bring that back to what I was showing you earlier with that same tower at the Ponce City Market and the Fulton Cotton Mill Lofts in Atlanta. So just wanted to point that out, the similarities. And again, with our historical narrative, how were they building all of these buildings the same way?
Yeah,
you know, if each building has its own separate story, how did they all get built the same way? And my answer is it was all the same civilization. And they were orienting things to the cardinal points, you know, north, south, east, and west, like the pyramids of Giza are oriented to the cardinal points. Exactly. And I think that's what's going on here. I think that's what's going on with the older buildings in downtown Atlanta, New York City, in Manhattan. I think everything was being perfectly aligned. This is the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. And if you look it up on Wikipedia today, it's going to tell you that construction started in 1932 and it was completed in 1935. And that would have been smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. So compare that to the Druid Hills Baptist Church where we first started. It doesn't have the same number of columns, but it looks pretty similar. And I know the door here is gigantic. So we've already talked about this door being large. And again, I've found this same architectural style all over the world. You know, I've seen it in Central Asia, places like Kyrgyzstan. This was worldwide. And then this is a detail at the Supreme Court, where you've got the line here and then the 2 cross lines here and the line going through the center here. And you've got that same design at LeConte Hall at University of Georgia in Athens. And you have that same design in different places around the world also. Okay, so that's my prepared presentation. I think I just admitted somebody. And like I said at the beginning, I pulled from research that I've already done. I've got a lot more examples, but it could go on and on and on. I hope I've given you enough to at least show you why I believe what I believe.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of having you back is let's look at, you know, closer to home for Georgia, obviously, but then let's compare notes with other regions and other countries. Let's start putting on these glasses in order to see this sort of point of view from a different perspective. Because once I started getting into this, you know, research, just listening to what other people are researching, because this is not my type of thing. I don't go looking at the history, but it just started a new awareness for my own, you know, learning process to look in my own town and see all this evidence literally everywhere, you know, and visiting all the different small towns around, it has the same signature basically, where the windows are at ground level. And we're going to see this whole history with new eyes. And I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Does anybody have questions for Michelle? Okay, you can go ahead, Linda, if you want to, and unmute your microphone. You can speak to Michelle if you wish.
I'm happy to field questions.
Yeah, she put a question in the chat.
Okay.
So, so it says, Michelle, these are amazing collection. This is amazing collection of pictures, and she came in late. Would you be so kind as to repeat briefly what you believe from all of these photos?
Certainly. So my underlying belief is that there was an advanced worldwide civilization that built all of the Earth's infrastructure that was wiped out by a cataclysm that created a flood of mud, and that we've been given a brand new historical narrative to facilitate, shall we say, the new world order that we're experiencing the end of. Right?
Yes.
They're done.
They're done.
But they got disturbingly far along in their plans. You know, how are you going to take over everything? How are you going to take over humanity? How are you going to take over the Earth's grid system? How are you going to replace the creator with your guy, the dark side? And this is how they did it. And they wiped out everything, and they dug everything out. They got things restarted. They repopulated the Earth, and they gave us a new history. I think it got its full kickoff in the mid 1800s, the historical narrative, and we've been educated in it. And you know, we've been given a false history with everything attributed to the newcomers, and that, you know, we're just much less than what we're capable of, is what they want us to believe about ourselves. And they've given us alcohol and drugs and movies and car races and all kinds of distractions, jobs, to keep us from focusing on our spiritual development. It's to their benefit to keep us distracted and stuck in our lower selves. And you know, they want to turn us into something different than what we are.
Yes, and the transhumanism agenda is in full swing as we speak. We do have a couple of other questions. Margaret, you go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Okay, I think I've got this figured out. Thank you, Michelle. This is great. Since your last meeting, I've been binge watching your videos, and my mind is just blown away by all this. Because I didn't know all this beginning part. So my question was the timelines, the rewritten. I've always thought that something was off, even when I was young. I was amazed at the engineering of all the places I visited. Traveled many places around the world, and I grew up in Philadelphia, so there's lots of old history there. Actually, in Washington's Crossing, which is another, you know, things there were just questionable. So to the point of timelines, you mentioned the Supreme Court building that was, you know, built in 1932, or at least that's what Wikipedia says. How do you answer questions? I was trying to convey this to my husband. Like, how did they build this without technology? And he was like, well, you know, all the people were out of work. And what are some things we can say to people if we're trying to explain, you know, these things that we're looking at? And my second question is, I'm going to Zion National Park in 3 weeks. So are there any specific areas in places like that? Grand Canyon and Bryce Canyon are also on our list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, look at it differently, because what they want us to believe is that everything you see is natural. And especially in the Southwest, which is where I live in Arizona, you've got mesas and canyons and so on and so forth. But if you really just start looking at it differently, there's pyramids, you know, mesas are like a type of structure. Just look at it from the standpoint of, is this natural or is this man-made? And especially in Bryce Canyon, it looks like it was melted. The formations look like they were melted. And I've got comparisons. If I need to get email addresses somehow, because I can send you some information, but because it's a lot easier to show you than tell you.
Yeah, sure. Now, Jill, don't you have a website address or some sort of blog that you can send out emails to people? Because you can share that certainly with the chat.
I'm gonna share my email first right now. And if you have specific, if you have
Patron, or however you say that.
Okay, and I'm gonna put my website here. piercingtheveilofillusion.com. I would say just look at it from the standpoint of, like with the Grand Canyon, did the Colorado River actually carve this? And because that's what they tell us. Or is there more going on there? And I mean, there's places in the Grand Canyon you just cannot go. If you try to hike there, helicopters will show up or armed guards will show up. I've heard stories like that. I haven't personally been there to experience that, but I've heard that. And you know, there's definitely things they're trying to keep from the public. And Bryce Canyon looks like it's got a lot of spires, and it just looks like something that used to be infrastructure that something happened to. Now, there's a lot of different opinions on what caused this mud flood. I think there also could have been some kind of nuclear attack, you know, with the world's deserts, including the Southwest here, but the Sahara and Australia and China and Africa, the Kalahari in Africa, India. It would not surprise me at all that there was some kind of nuclear attack in those places.
Yeah, I don't believe that the deserts are natural. I believe that it was from some event that caused the deserts on this existence, and we're creating more desert by them destroying the natural habitats of trees and things. James has been waiting for a while with his question as well.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Thanks for this. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this presentation. This is really some fascinating stuff. And I've noticed those kinds of things in the past, but I never really was able to think too deeply into it because I was too busy. But anyways, I was curious too, that first map that you had put up, I think that was for ley lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those ley lines. And I think the one that you had pointed out was that the Acadian ley line that runs?
It could have been one of them. I mean, the ley lines were all over the earth. And what I think I found was the terminus of this grid system, of this ley line system, when I found the star tetrahedron. And for those that came in late, I'm going to share my screen real quick here and show you what he's talking about. Oh. My screen. Okay, there we go. That threw me for a loop. Okay.
Weird.
So this is what he's talking about. And I think this is this gave me so much information when I worked with this, and started extending the lines out. And there's more to it than this. I mean, this is just one aspect of it. There's shapes like this all over the earth. There's all kinds of geometric shapes. I think this is a flower of life pattern around the earth. It's based on the flower of life and sacred geometry. And the one that you mentioned, the ley line that you mentioned, I'm sure that's all connected in here somehow. Did you say the Magdalene?
The Acadian.
The Acadian. Yeah, I mean, it's all connected. I mean, we just have not been told the truth about our history. We've got bits and pieces of it floating to the surface. So we hear about Acadia and Acadians, but we get the story about the Acadians being expelled from Canada, from Nova Scotia, forcibly taken down to Louisiana, and that's how the Cajuns got to Louisiana. That's what we're told. That's the history that we're told. We're not told about the ley line and the civilization that was here and that kind of thing. It's all tied into how this original civilization was taken down, as opposed to what's true about it. And so, can you speak a little bit about the Acadian ley line? Because I have an idea in my head, but you might be more familiar with it.
Well, I've just started doing a little bit of research on that, but it basically, goes over the top of Mexico City, Mobile, Alabama, Atlanta, basically the airport, Lawrenceville, Georgia, I think Pilot Mountain in North Carolina, which seems to have some significance. I'm not sure what it is though exactly.
Right.
But then the big ones is it runs over Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C.,
right,
up through Acadia.
Yeah,
and southern Louisiana.
Is that the same as the 188-degree ley line? Do you know?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know on that one.
That's a major one also. So there's a lot within that. I mean, again, I think the whole history of the earth revolves around these ley lines. And we just have to struggle to put the puzzle back together. One place that I would recommend looking at is a researcher named Peter Shampoo, and he got mentioned on a video I did fairly recently, but he's got has done some interesting work on specific ley lines. His website is called geometryofplace.com. And he's got some really cool stuff on here. So you might want to look into that. There's other ones as well, but this one looks particularly interesting since he seems to focus on North America.
Yeah, I think I've seen that one before. That's the one that I think it has a circle, like some kind of a biome. It was labeled as a biome circle around Mount Pilot, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So
it shows up on one of his ley lines.
Yeah.
So that's geometryofplace.com if anybody's interested in learning more about that particular subject. I think the Parthenon in Nashville is absolutely pre-existing architecture. And that's another impossible story that they tell us about how it came into existence. It was for the Tennessee Centennial Exhibition, and it was built in like 2 years.
Wow.
And it's just like the Parthenon in Athens, except that it's complete. Right down to a statue of Athena on the inside.
Yeah.
So
how realistic is that, And you have another question there. When would you think that the nuclear attacks may have taken place?
I don't know, except that I think we're looking at this whole thing coming in within the last 200 to 300 years. So I think we're only looking back a couple of 100 years at the most when this took place.
Yeah, there seems to be evidence of some sort of great cataclysm. It's not just the mud that was everywhere. That Fantasy Canyon is very interesting, I guess. Have you looked into that?
I have not.
It's, I mean, it is weird. You can just tell that the rock was melted, and it's got the weirdest shapes and textures. So, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot, and we're just putting this puzzle back together. But just to add to what you were saying about the ley lines and things, you know, Feng Shui, they say that Feng Shui is actually a huge part of our existence, and that the door to your house, and as well as the head of your bed, should be aligned with a certain cardinal direction. And I know, you know, I always refer to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, but there's a lot of information in this book, because he says that if you lie with your head to the north for 1 hour each day, focusing and meditating on your head to your waist, and then rotating to your head to the south and focusing on your waist to your feet, that can actually maintain your physical appearance and your health. There may be something to it, because it's all energy that we're dealing with.
Right. And we're energy. Same principles apply to us.
Yeah, exactly. Badland, South Dakota blew Deborah's mind, she says. And Shelley says that she's confused about the conflicting stories about Three Gorges Dam. Is it gone? I mean, I haven't looked into that, but.
It's supposed to be a linchpin for what's going on. There's supposed to be all kinds of bad stuff that's been going on over there underneath. The child trafficking, adrenochrome production, Bitcoin mining is supposed to, the Three Gorges Dam is supposed to be associated with all of that. And it's supposed to be one of the things that gets taken out when everything hits the fan. All I know is that there's a lot of flooding going on in China right now.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can say is I hope all of these are signs, you know, about the fight between good and evil, and that, you know, things are happening, even though it may not seem like they are, that there's actually stuff happening that is going to clean a lot of stuff out.
Yeah, I do believe that we are going to head to better times, but we do have to keep, you know, patient, just focus on our own creation and helping each other while we can during this time. So what else was it that you were finding with the different canals and the flooding and everything? Did they just reroute all the
I think they did. I do. I mean, I think the dams, the hydroelectric projects and all that were pre-existing, and they just diverted, created man-made lakes, which serve the purpose of creating jobs and a water supply, especially during the New Deal and the Great Depression, the CCC. They covered up a lot of towns when they did that. You know, I'm sure that's the case with Lake Lanier. I recently did a study on that. But I mean, that whole Piedmont area is filled with man-made lakes. And, you know, a lot of stories about towns being flooded. And what else were they flooding?
Yeah, I mean, those man-made lakes are literally everywhere. You know, Lake Sinclair, I believe that's man-made. So that means we need some divers to go and explore our lakes and see what we can find.
Some of them are pretty deep. They buried them good.
Yeah, well, I believe that we're going to see a lot, you know, start to come to fruition, especially with some of these Indian mounds that they seem to always want to guard and covet for people digging. I still believe that those mounds, a lot of them have the bones of giants underneath them. And
I think they were also intentional earthwork infrastructure. I think it was connected to the Earth's grid system. And I think we're talking about golf courses too. They're mounds. They're just not called mounds.
Yeah, this is
the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Same construction.
Yeah, so well, I mean, we have some interesting ancient sites here in Georgia. There is one out I-20 East. If you're going out towards Greensboro, there is an old settlement called Shoals, and it's not spelled the way we spell skull today. It's spelled with SCULL, and apparently it got flooded somehow because it's right on a creek, and these settlers actually moved away and they never rebuilt the town. But there are a couple of Indian mounds out there. There's a small one and there is a huge one right by the creek. And it's an interesting place. I went out there and I just kind of explored around with my brother. And you find some interesting architecture that's basically been destroyed out there as well. But then we also have that ancient site that was featured on America Unearthed about the Mayans that had a settlement here in Georgia, which is another, evidence of a global civilization. Due to our Georgia clay, they've actually done analysis of the clay here in Georgia to that is in Mexico. And they found that it is the same clay from Georgia that made the Mayan blue of Mexico. And that episode can be found online, America Unearthed. I believe it's on YouTube. But do we have any more questions? Moki Mounds. Where is the Moki Mounds? I don't know where, I'm not familiar with that name. But, and of course, the Indian mounds we have in Macon. I grew up in Macon, and there's some mounds down there, and they've already, restructured them and dug them out. Like one of them you can go inside of, and they say that it was just sort of a ceremonial place. Oh, Kalamoki is in South Georgia. I'm not familiar with that one, but there's just so much to discover. And I believe that, we are the ones who are going to be bringing forth as much information to the table as possible to share, so that we can reveal what has been hidden for so long.
And it's just really a pretty important piece of the human story that needs to come back out. With everything, we're living in the time of revealing, and with everything coming out, for those that are really able to grasp it, and you have to let go of a lot in order to really receive the new. But it's just something that, we just need to know what's gone on here. And if you only have part of the story, and something's not right in the world right now, everything was just completely turned upside down. And, for those who might be familiar with Gilbert and Sullivan, the operetta guys, the British guys, in the late 1800s, they were talking about a period called topsy-turvy. And I haven't really studied their works too much, but it's come to my mind that they were, like so many other writers and artists, they're telling us the story, or they're shaping the new narrative. And there's information in there for us because they have to tell us what they're doing. And we know that today as predictive programming in Hollywood movies and so forth, in music. They have to tell us what they're doing, but they don't tell us that they're telling us. And they give it to us as art. And I just did some research based on comments that people are leaving me on some of the public art in different places. There's just horrendous art, horrendous low vibrational art.
Yes, I've been familiar with Vigeland. They call it Frogner Park, and all of the reptilian examples that are there. I mean, it's right in your face with a lot of the stuff.
But people don't see it that way because it's art. Okay, we're going to stick it in this public place. But I mean, it's just horrible, the stuff that they've got right in front of us and what they're telling us with it.
I agree. So if you guys really want to get some eye-opening information, I've also been aware of the Vatican for a while, and the snake, the head of the snake, that is the audience hall, as well as I believe it was Pope Benedict's throne that was so huge, and it's creepy. It doesn't look heavenly at all. It looks like demonic creepiness. But Vigeland Park is Frogner Park. It's in Oslo, Norway. And they have got some of the creepiest statues with these reptilian, I don't even know what it is. I don't know if it's supposed to represent some sort of archon or what, but these things are attached to people, binding them with their tentacle arm thing. I don't even know. They look like snakes with some sort of armor. It's almost like dragon-esque, and they're basically biting into people. There's a couple of examples of that, but then on the gates, there's also there's some reptilian symbolism again. And then the things that they're doing to babies.
It's really disturbing. And it's in a very public place in Oslo. And then there's a lot of places in the United States that has not anything quite that bad, but it's got stuff that you really have to wonder about what it's saying.
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff, I'm going to share these. That's in Oslo, Norway, but there's so much just right in your face, and they're always doing that. And now that more people are waking up, I think they're going to be able to go out and just look in their own environment and see with their own eyes and bring forth that information and share it with others. And that's why we have these types of meetings, is so that we can bring forth more knowledge. Let's expand the awareness even more. And let's do this together and start sharing everything we know. Because that's the one thing they don't want us to do.
Right. And I just saw that question about Zecharia Sitchin. I'm familiar with some of his work from about 10 years ago. I read The 12th Planet, and I read some of his Earth Chronicles books. So I'm aware of it, but I haven't, once I started doing my own research, I've pretty much been doing my own stuff. But I did, when I was hungry and looking for information, I did check out a lot of sources like that. Graham Hancock and Robert Bowall and the Orion theory with the pyramids of Giza lining up to the belt star of Orion. And, and then you find out there's pyramids and alignments like that all over the world. Mm-hmm. There's 3 pyramids outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, that are all covered with trees. They're very old. One of them is Pinnacle Mountain State Park, which you can tell from one angle is actually a pyramid, and it's very old. So, people don't realize that's what it is. And then if you're on the visitors center observation deck on a clear day, you can see the 2 other pyramids off in the distance, but you can't see that. There's only one place you can get that view. So, or unless you go to the top of Pinnacle Mountain, and I don't have the ability anymore to climb mountains or climb pyramids that are mountains.
Yeah, well, it makes you wonder, how many more pyramids are in the United States? There's got to be more.
Tons. And not just here, but all over.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Shelley Steele, do you want to share your experience when you did you go to the mounds in LaGrange? Are you still here, Shelley?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I wasn't really mounds. It was a big house. It was a big estate, the Hills and Dales estate. They had gardens there. They had all types of really, beautiful things there. And I don't know when it was built exactly. And apparently there are many, many acres where other family members live. This is open to the public. And then the rest of the family, who was originally a big part of the Callaway family, apparently one of the sons took this over, and they live a little ways away. Anyway, I thought it was extraordinary. It was beautiful, a lot of interesting architecture. I I just met you all, so I'm kind of embarrassed to even mention it, but this suddenly came up when listening to all of this. This kind of triggered a lot of stuff and interesting. But I've never experienced anything like this in my entire life. And I ended up going there with some friends from our garden club in Atlanta, and stayed at a beautiful historic old home, and then went over there to see Hills and Dales, and and walked around and saw a lot of history and some architecture and some different symbolism, I think. But all I know is that went back to to this beautiful, quaint, lovely Victorian home, and proceeded to get deathly, deathly ill. And I can't think of anything that particular other than we did stop at Hardee's, I think, earlier, and then went to a restaurant thing after, but just got the sickest I've ever been in my entire life, and spent the whole evening, all night, sick. And we woke up in the morning and went to the little bed and breakfast thing, went to get something to eat. And I walked outside the door to use the restroom. And all of a sudden there's this great big black blob in the middle of this gorgeous, beautiful home in the hallway. And it's a bat of all things. The lady just freaked out and started screaming and said, "I've never had anything like this in my entire life." And then I couldn't believe it all. We ended up walking outside and found that these trees had dropped huge branches and totally shattered the car. And I just thought, what is going on here? This is just a little over the top crazy. And I haven't wanted to go back to LaGrange since. So I'm sorry if that's TMI and a little weird, but it just was a very strange experience.
Oh, okay. So do you think it had anything to do with the architecture or anything? I mean, because, you know, I've never heard of hills and dales, but.
Could have been the energies there.
Yeah.
You think? Okay. Thanks, Michelle, for not making me feel retarded here.
Yes. No, definitely could have. Yeah. I mean, they've really messed with these lines. I don't think the ley lines were negative to begin with. And I still don't think they are, but I think there's been a lot of effort by the dark ones to use these ley lines negatively, or entities of some kind, maybe trapped there or something, you know, something might have been disturbed.
Yeah. Well, the lady had only owned the place for about 6 months and had renovated everything. So yeah. I don't know. Anyways, thanks for listening.
Mm-hmm. Well, my dad and stepmother lived in LaGrange for a few years. so I've actually been there, but maybe only once or twice.
So
I've got a lot of Georgia connections in my family.
Oh, that's good though. I mean, because you're just Georgia. Don't worry about it. You're Georgia at heart. You're one of us.
Got a lot of Georgia connection.
Yeah. So now let's talk about, who do you think they are? Where do you think they come from?
I believe in fallen angels. I think they're real. I think we're talking negative ETs. I think we're talking lower vibrational entities. And I think they've been having a field day while humanity's been sleeping, and they don't want their gravy train to stop. And so they engineered this way to come in, and I think they took everything over and gave us the false narrative, and been negatively feeding on human energies. And you know, I think there's an unholy alliance of evil that are in on this. And I tend to view Paradise Lost by John Milton, the epic poem that he wrote, as being like the earliest form of predictive programming. You know, where Satan and his buddies Moloch and all these other guys had been kicked out of heaven, and they got together to figure out how they could spoil God's most favored creation, which was humanity, and cooked up this plan, and Satan headed to the Garden of Eden. And you know, I think this has all been deliberately done. They saw an opportunity, and I said they've gotten disturbingly close to getting away with it. I don't believe that they will, but it's just too hard to watch what's going on right now.
Yeah, and then, you know, you hear about the root races too. Aren't we supposed to be like the fourth root race or something? Is it the fourth?
I don't know as much about that, but I do, you know, this Earth has been here for a very, very long time, far longer than what we've been told. And life on Earth has. And so how this has been evolving in terms of not only our own evolution, but the evolution of the universe is supposed to be going in a positive direction. That's the way it's supposed to go. But these guys came in and hijacked it, and they want to take it in their direction, which is the artificial intelligence and the control over everything.
Yeah, and have you heard about the Yuga cycles? Are you familiar with that term? So, and we're supposed to be in the Kali Yuga, and I guess we're going to be coming out of the Kali Yuga, which is the lower states of consciousness. That these cycles, and most people, you're probably not familiar. There's these cycles called the Yuga. This is from India, and they talk about it's almost like sine waves of consciousness throughout the 26,000 year cycle that they call the Great Year. And this is when we go around all of the zodiac signs through each age. And each age is about 2,600 years. Now, some of them are shorter or longer depending on the size of the star formation that they represent. But that can also be determined, according to Jordan Maxwell, by where the sun rises on the spring equinox of each year. That's how they determine what age it is. And whatever celestial alignment is in the backdrop of the sun rising in the east, then that determines the age. And that's kind of interesting. I don't really know a whole lot about astrotheology, but I believe it's going to be coming back to us because that is part of our lost history of major, major knowledge that we could know about ourselves and the future. That's why people have astrology charts and learn astrology about themselves. It's fascinating, but it is deep. It's another plethora of information.
And my personal take on it is, I don't think we're going to go back to exactly the way things were, the types of things I've been talking about in my presentation, but I do think we're going into something new and better in this golden age, in this evolution. And we have to kind of navigate through this time of almost like being in two worlds. But, for those that are conscious and awake and heart-centered, there's a lot that's incumbent on us to help humanity through this time as well, because there's, a lot of scared people, a lot of frightened people, a lot of sleeping people, not knowing what's going on. And we have to hold that space and just see what the new is coming in, what new abilities, what new everything, and we've got to stop this here. This can't ever happen again.
Yeah.
Especially with the calling of humanity and the way that it's been going on. I mean, they do have a depopulation agenda. It's very, very real.
Yeah, I believe that with this digital age that we are going into, obviously we're not going to let it go. We've already embraced it as part of our existence, but we have to be very responsible and very aware of what these capabilities bring about, because it's a fine line of truly dangerous levels of activity. Allowing artificial intelligence into our world and to start living in harmony with us side by side, that's our future. We're looking at that in the face, and robots are going to be our future. They're going to free us from the slave system that we have been in, but at the same time, it's going to be like the Matrix, where we have to find the balance in our own consciousness and creating these artificial intelligences that can still maintain some level of integrity, to not redevelop their own thoughts to turn on us and then take control, just like the Matrix movies.
Right. I think that's a good point, because so artificial intelligence is real. It's a big part of the problem that we're facing, but it doesn't have to be adversarial. I mean, it can be our friend. So how do we flip that? The way they flipped the civilization, how do we flip that? And have a bright future for humanity, which again, I still believe we're going to have. I can't believe they're going to get away with this. But within what we know about in our world today, how can we make this work for us instead of all of this information that's been withheld from us? And not just the kinds of things that I've been talking about with my presentation, but also about free energy, about alternative healing modalities that have been kept from us, about replicators that have been kept from us, about all the things that have been kept from us that should never have been kept from us. What's that all about? They kept it for themselves, the controllers. They don't want us to have that. And so, and I've got to make that right, however that's going to end up happening. And I do follow Simon's blog, and I look to him for for comforting information that in fact, yes, good things are happening.
Yeah, I do believe that we are on the rise, but we have to stay focused. Just keep your spirit happy. If you find yourself coming down, getting depressed or feeling like we're not winning, you have to find your happy place. What makes you happy? Turn to other people who are doing positive things, who can lift you up, because this is the most important thing, is for us to stay at this higher frequency. And also, look at the foods. I believe all this truth about how the clothes we wear are affecting our frequency, all these synthetic fabrics, all these crazy colors with crazy patterns and low consciousness, logos, all this stuff is affecting our reality.
That's a good point.
And we're going to be coming into this awareness of how deep this construct really has been to try to stop our frequencies from rising. And I don't know, Michelle, did you ever hear, like back in 2007, that they had discovered a little boy that had 3 strands of DNA? He was 10 years old, I believe. But I just came across this story last year.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
So
2007 was about the year I started really waking up.
Okay, well, I just came across this story about this little boy that the scientists or doctors found that had 3 strands of DNA, and they were baffled. They're like, what in the world is going on? And in certain circles, you will hear that we are supposed to be getting our upgrades because it's all done through light frequencies. Light frequencies can just, be. All of a sudden, they can just appear. And apparently, this little boy has already started his activation of his DNA, and each one of us is supposed to start this process of getting our DNA, the 12 strands that are missing from our bodies. And that means that we're going to start becoming more psychically connected, more telepathic, and all of these different things. And I've been noticing slowly, even in my own daily life, that this is starting to happen. All of a sudden, someone's, name will come in my head and an image of the person. And I'll just think about them for half a second. And the next thing, they're texting me or they're calling me. And I'm like, okay, something is coming online. I don't know. It's this whole journey is just fascinating. And I believe each one of us, that's probably why too, they're doing this DNA grab, is because they're trying to keep up with how many people are getting their DNA upgrades without them even being aware. I guarantee you, these geneticists in these labs, they know exactly what is going on, what has been implicated as far as how our genetics have been spliced into creating our lower states of consciousness and creating the slave race. I believe this DNA thing is very ancient, and that this is part of our lost history, because these designer dogs and all these miniature animals, they don't just pop out of nowhere. They're doing this stuff in labs somewhere. I just know it. I feel it.
Yeah, there's so much more than what I've talked about has been kept from us, but that's a biggie because we don't see it because it's not supposed to be there.
Yeah,
around, in the world around us.
Exactly.
It's not what we've been taught, so we don't see it. just kind of blends in with the environment.
Yeah, there's so many things to consider. You know, that's why I'm just out here. I sample. I feel like I've got a sample platter of all these different topics, and I just go around trying to learn at least a little bit about all these different things. Is there anybody else that has questions for Michelle right now? You can go ahead and type in the chat or raise your virtual hand and ask her some questions. Going once, going twice. They're very appreciative of having you here, Michelle. I mean, this information is very imperative to know about our lost history. James, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was struggling to raise my hand. So anyways, yeah, Michelle, I was just curious. The towers that you talked about, I've heard it, like, you know, one or two different things about those, that maybe there's some kind of either sound frequency or some other kind of maybe electric serve some kind of purpose like that. I don't know if any of your research has gotten any more detailed information.
I'm sure
about
it did.
that.
I'm sure it did. And where I fall short is the scientific side of the house, but as far as the intuitive side and pattern recognition and things like that, I'm in pretty good shape. But I'm absolutely sure that there's a functionality to those, like those towers and those shapes, the shapes of the windows, the number of windows, and that everything was all connected to each other. The older rail stations, older Union stations have cathedral rose windows. And so, you know, I think these buildings were connected to each other. And I think the rail systems were part of this energy generation system, you know, like a perpetual motion machine of some kind, or, you know, there was some kind of connection with railroads and subways and streetcars and trolley parks. And it was fun. You know, the trolley parks were at the end of these lines, and there were rides there. And it seems like the trolley cars were some kind of, you know, maybe additional energy source, or something was going on with them before the whole system got taken over. And, you know, I just see it as, it was just a very merry, happy, healthy, well-balanced place. And that included the infrastructure, and that included the civilization. And, you know, people weren't the messes that they are today as a whole, collectively. You know, with
it's so fascinating to think about, the possibility of discovering, you know, the truth of what those things are for and how they work.
That's what I would love to know. And I'm trying to work with some other people to get to the bottom of some of those things, because I'm sure they did. I know it was connected. I just don't know the science behind how it all worked together.
Yeah. So, and, you know, one thing I wanted to point out to people is, like, look at what they used structurally to make their buildings. It was bricks and stone. And what we have today is stuff that will deteriorate. We have wood, and, you know, all this concrete stuff doesn't really last for hundreds of thousands of years. But if you think of how long a stone will last, I mean, and it has a natural orgone energy that is emitted from the earth. So it's really just mind-blowing when you really start to ponder the depth of all of this. Let's see. Yeah, they're thanking you. Thank you so much. It's very enlightening. A lot of people are thanking you. And Karen says, one gentleman postulated that the rose windows were used like a speaker system, and that is why the organs are placed by them in the cathedrals.
I think the civilization was frequency-based, positive frequency-based, because there's solfeggio shapes. And the organs were right up against these windows. And I think they were, you know, sending out these different frequencies into this system. And again, that's why I say I think it was all coordinated together, different frequencies from different buildings. A lot of these buildings were destroyed in wars, urban renewal, you know, you name it. I think the wars were covers for that as well.
Yeah, you know, the destroyers of worlds, obviously the death cults have taken over, and they think they're going to win, but they don't win this one.
They're not going to win it. No, not even going to think about that. And and the Biltmore was another one of Frederick Law Olmsted's creations that we're told about. It's beautiful if you've been there in Asheville.
Yeah, I'm not familiar about the ones in Nashville, but you know, the people have been talking about, they've, you know, obviously found that there was free energy involved with all of this, and that there's always some sort of water source nearby. And with what we've been talking about, I don't know how many people we have that have been on the Crystal Brigade here, but, you know, Marcel Vogel and Dr. Masaru Emoto, and all of these people who have done research with water and it being liquid crystal and holding memory and all of this stuff, when we start to talk about cymatics and sound waves and how that impacts water, you know, you come to the conclusion that this was all one harmonious, balanced society as a global scale, whether it's globe or flat, that's, you know, still coming about. But it was one giant society that was living in harmony with the space that we exist in.
Yeah. And a lot of healing modalities. I mean, hot springs, waterfalls, you know, I mean, it was all, you know, putting out the negative ions, and, you know, just going, certain places make you feel really good. You know, there's certain places make you feel bad, but there's places that make you feel good just being there.
Exactly. You can do this with just having a teepee as well. My roommate who recently moved out, he insisted on building a teepee in my yard. And I'm telling you, when I got in that thing, I was like, this actually feels like it has a resonant energy to it that feels really good. So I encourage people, if y'all want to have some permanent structure in your yard, you can get some bamboo and get some sort of other material. You can use, I guess, sails from ships or something, but wrap it around that bamboo and sew it together. This feels amazing. Go ahead, James, you had a question?
Yeah, more a comment, but just real quick. There was a YouTube video I was watching the other day. This lady, she's like very intuitive, but she was saying that really the buildings and houses are supposed to be circular, not square, because it's better for the movement of you know, spiritual energy around that structure. So, because like if it's a square, it's going to run into the wall. But interesting how you said that about the teepee too. But even if you look at, like, you know, at least some of the pictures and videos I've seen of Central America, of some of the shamans, they're always in that round kind of hut with the fire in the middle. You know, it's always round. So anyway, thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, thanks for that input. Yeah, those yurts, they're like yurts. I have a miniature tent yurt, you know, it's an 8-man yurt. And I haven't actually gotten in it and camped yet, but I wanted to. I imagine it does have a good sort of resonant frequency to it. What are your thoughts, Michelle? You have any?
Yeah, I've heard it's the same thing as James, and what you're describing, that's a natural energy flow. And I've heard that about yurts also. And there's teepees over in Asia as well. So it's not just a Plains Indian thing.
Exactly. Well, these natural shapes and geometries, I think, are very important. They're going to start coming back into our lives and our existence as we move forward with the knowledge. We can bring this into our daily lives too. And if you're interested, any of you, in creating your own orgone accumulator, which is a healing frequency box using the natural earth energies, you can go to the Wilhelm Reich museum online and just order the plans. I did it. I think it was $11 to buy the plans to build one. And it's kind of fascinating. I think I want to make mine in the shape of a pyramid. So I'll probably be redesigning that. But yeah, it's fascinating stories here that we can learn just by sharing all this information. And, you know, I am so excited. Does anyone else have questions for Michelle? Jill is saying that there was a round mansion in Swanee Mountain near Cumming, and it was taken down a couple of years ago, and it looked like a disc. The story about it does seem made up when you look into it. It does not surprise me. They want to get rid of all these buildings that have these dome structures.
It looked kind of like a spaceship or flying saucer. I did some research on that recently.
Okay, yeah, well, maybe they actually function. Who knows?
But like you said, the story just like, what? This guy built this house for his family, and they ended up demolishing it for whatever reason.
Yeah, it never makes any sense, does it? I mean, it's like, what? Who goes around building a huge structure, beautiful structures, and then says, you know what? We're done with that now. Let's pack it up, demolish it, blow it up, whatever. We're going to put something else. We're going to put a parking lot. It doesn't make sense.
Let me just share my screen real quick. And it's interesting too. So let's see. This is the one. No, that just shows up. So anyway, if you can see it here.
Interesting. You know, it reminds me of Men in Black.
And look, it's sitting on top of an old, an old stone structure, and it's pretty messed up here. It got into a pretty bad state of decay before they tore it down.
Yeah, that's really bizarre.
Yeah, so good example.
But yeah, I mean, that looks like the whole tower structure that they had in Men in Black, you know. I don't know if you remember that part where they have to climb that and get in the spaceship and it actually functions. Yeah, it's so ridiculous.
So as far as the Georgia Guidestones go, I'm sure the cabal's behind that. Oh, sure, yeah. Sure it is. Sure they are.
Yeah, I mean, the Georgia Guidestones were recently vandalized too. Someone went in there and spray painted just the 1% trying to kill the rest of us. I was like, yes. Can we just pull those down? There used to be one on Signal Mountain in Chattanooga, around spaceship-like structure. Interesting. So these things, are they just like in random places?
There's always a story to explain it. I mean, I want to say that it was like built, the one on Swanee Mountain was said to have been built in the 70s by an architect for his family. Something along those lines, and then something happened.
Yeah, so much is being revealed. But does anybody else have any comments or questions for Michelle? Anything in the chat? We have a few people still here. We got 21 people left. Well, yeah, I guess if there's nothing else. Thank you very much, Michelle, for visiting with us.
So there's one thing there. The Chattahoochee River was purposefully rerouted. Sorry, I can't talk. Into 13 dams responsibility for generating hydropower and electricity. And 13 is an interesting number. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to all of that. And I really appreciate the invitation to speak with you all again. And I am a Connecting Consciousness member in Arizona. And, you know, to me, this is very much a spiritual path. And so I feel very much at home here.
No, that's excellent. I mean, you know, you have your spiritual purpose and calling right now, and you're driven to reveal this information. And we are just above the moon and beyond grateful for this whole process that you are sharing with us, because, you know, I feel like your work is very important, as well as those who are also bringing more information about this topic to the table.
Yeah, and there's a number of really good researchers on YouTube that are doing similar work. John Levi is very popular.
Yes.
I mean, there's other ones too. So just, you know, mudflood. If you type in mudflood, you'll get a whole bunch of people.
Yes, mudflood in Tartaria. And I've been following the Mud Fossil University for years now, and I've tried to have him on as a guest speaker, but he is yet to want to come after I mentioned something about some other researchers who were actually investigating flat Earth. Apparently, he's had some really, really tough experiences with flat Earth people and has been attacked on a regular basis on his own channels. And when I mentioned this, he no longer really was interested in speaking with us. Although I told him, I said, I am not a purveyor of any one belief system, that I'm just researching about everything, and I'm open to all the information presented. But if I just mentioned flat Earth, and he was just completely turned off and didn't want to speak to me. He's like, I don't have anything to do with those people. And it made me sad, because he is uncovering a lot of groundbreaking information, doing DNA analysis of some of these mud fossils, and actually finding that they have DNA, human DNA in them. And some of them are from giants. So, it's fascinating to look at all of this research and find this information. Yeah, someone is mentioning that they believe Earth is both flat and round due to it being a hologram. Do we really know? I mean, does it really matter about what it is? I mean, I think what matters is just us coming together again.
Right, I do too. And it's not what drives my work. I'm open to both ideas, but to me, I'm more concerned about the genocide of humanity than I am about the shape of the Earth.
Yes, exactly. The shape of the
my big
plain,
concern.
The shape doesn't matter. It doesn't. What matters is that we come back and unify in our effort to recreate a beautiful world that's harmonious and balanced for everything, for all life that's here. That's the most important thing to look forward to. So if there are no, yes. Yeah, I'm now, the reptilian theme keeps coming forward. I'm telling you, there's something to this. And I recently watched another channel and I believe it's the channel called The Fifth Kind on YouTube, where he was actually asking the question, who or what is controlling this reality? And it goes into a lot of the dragon lore in the Bible. It's mentioned in the Bible about Leviathan and all these entities. That's also a fascinating topic if you want to get into something like that, where it's like they actually mention dragons. And I believe that's what they're also hiding with the dinosaur bones. I believe the dinosaur bones are actually dragons of old. But, I don't have any physical proof of that. It's just my belief system. I believe that we've been lied to on many, many, many levels, pretty much every level. But yes, does anybody else wish to speak to Michelle? Cheryl Waldrop says she's seen a dragon.
I believe. I believe dragons and mermaids and mermen and unicorns. I'm there.
Yes. Well, we're starting to see what these genetics and genetic splicing can do. And with them digging up all of these bones, it's not to say that these things are not possible. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, she said she saw a dragon that floated through her yard. Supposedly Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mexico, was, according to what I've heard, benevolent and was also educating and helping the humans there. I don't know. I believe in good and bad entities and beings. So, and I believe that some people can see in other dimensions that others can't. So, you know, I'm a person of all possibilities. I'm like, I believe in just a little bit of everything. And I believe if you stay that way, you'll have a much easier time as we transition through all of this great awakening. I think it's very important.
And I do see it happening. The great awakening is happening.
Yes, and so that thing about the timelines converging in 2030, I believe that's our focal point for the far future, but for the immediate future, we should just focus on the positive things that we can create in our own worlds and stop looking at their dystopia. Because as we focus on that and we put our frequency in a lower state, they win.
Right.
Which is how they've been winning.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And there's a lot of good, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good people. In spite of everything that's happened, it's still an amazing world. And I'm grateful that I didn't experience the worst that the earth has to offer. I've had a pretty good life. And so I was much older when I started waking up to the other stuff, like within the last 10 years, and I'll be 60 in a couple of years.
Well,
so
you really don't look 60. I'm 51. You don't look 60.
58 and a half.
Okay. Well, we're going to stay young. You know, research orgone energy and orgone oils and things. You can make all these elixirs to put on your skin, and it's basically just grapeseed oil and sea salt, natural sea salt. You make like an elixir and you can put it on. People swear by it. I've made some and I use it from time to time. I don't use it all the time. But yeah, look into orgone energy. There's so many different things, you know, levels of information, and now we need to just bring it back home.
Right. So thank you for making this possible.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again for the second half of your presentation, because this is really, really, really important. I feel this bringing forth the lost history of Earth, you know, along with many others who are doing the same thing. It's so important and invaluable information right now. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. And with that, everyone, if you want to say goodnight to Michelle Gibson, we're going to go ahead and close this session. You can unmute your microphones and we will all bid each other adieu and good evening. All right. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank
you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, and bless you so big.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a great rest of your evening. It's about 3 hours, 3 hours earlier here, so I still have a little bit of my evening left.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good evening.